Hi, ladies and gentlemen. I'm Mr. Schwank, and welcome to Cleo's Corner. On today's episode, we're going to investigate how the Europeans managed to survive in a hostile environment and create settlements that would become the foundation of our nation. While we do that, we'll also be figuring out where the earliest English colonies in America were located, how each colony struggled to survive in their own particular way, and how the geography of America caused the early English colonies to develop different ways of living, in which turn established the foundations of an American identity and culture. It's a strange new world today on Cleo's Corner. So our big idea today, just to kind of summarize that, is that while the colonists struggled to survive in a new environment, the struggle itself created the foundations of an American identity and culture. And so that's sort of the big idea that I'm trying to get you guys to understand today. You know, it is very possible that in our lifetimes, we will see humans create settlements on the moon or even Mars. As amazing as that is, talk about an environment completely hostile to human life. The moon and Mars have no easily found sources of food and water, building materials, or even oxygen. Our future space explorers will have to travel days or even years with only the resources they take with them and no real hope of help from Earth if they were to have a problem. Think about the things that might go wrong. How likely is it that every attempt we make at colonizing space will be a success? It's hard to think about, and it would be a horrible tragedy, but accidents will very likely happen. Now, imagine if you lived in England in the late 1500s. You make the decision to sign on to a crew that's going to create a settlement in newly discovered land on the other side of the ocean. Europeans had lived in Europe for thousands of years. The land had been tamed and was largely predictable. You live in a community that can support you if something bad happens. Instead, you're going to get on a boat with only the supplies you have. You're going to journey for 4 to 6 months to a land few people from Europe had ever seen. No farm fields existed, no permanent structures, unbroken dense forests extending as far as you could hope to go. There's no guarantee of assistance from England if your crops fail or if you're attacked by hostile natives who believe that you are trespassing on their land, which you are. This is the task that faced the first European settlers to America. But being one of the first English settlers would have been like settling Mars. You would only have what you were able to pack on the boat. You were completely out of communication with the world you knew, and you wouldn't know if or when additional supplies were coming. It was not easy, and many died before Europeans learned to survive in this strange new world. However, out of the struggle was born the foundations of a new society. These early English colonists didn't know it at the time, but the moment they stepped foot off on the shores of this new continent, they started a process of becoming Americans and creating a new and unique nation. The story is a process. It takes time, and not all of the colonies and settlements that we grow up learning about existed at the exact same time. The first attempt at an English settlement started in 1854. The famous Sir Walter Raleigh was given permission by Queen Elizabeth I of England to create a permanent settlement in North America. One settlement was attempted and quickly abandoned before trying again in 1587 under the leadership of John White. They settled on Roanoke Island in what is now North Carolina. But from the very beginning of the first colony, it was clear that the English did not see the local natives as equals. As one colonist said about how to deal with the natives, the way of conquering them is much more easy than civilizing them by fair means, for they are a rude, barbarous, and naked people who were before viewed as friends may now justly be compelled to servitude and drudgery. So clearly, they were not going to see natives as friends or equals, although they relied on the natives for food and supplies. European diseases killed large numbers of natives, which led to fear and violence on both sides. However, when the first settlement was abandoned and they returned to England, they brought with them three items native to America but unknown to the English: corn, potatoes, and tobacco. The popularity of these items would drastically alter European ways of life. and spur more desire to colonize and grow more of these goods, especially tobacco. When the second group of settlers arrived under John White, the natives were far more cautious and hostile. 115 English settlers, including women, arrived. These were largely middle class Londoners who expected to become a new upper class of people in America. They were not people who were accustomed to planting crops and building homes and other basic tasks. It was also difficult to leave the boundaries of the fort now without being killed by natives who saw the English as a threat. Notably, Roanoke was the settlement where White's daughter Eleanor Dare gave birth to the first English child born in America. The baby was named Virginia Dare in honor of the colony and Queen Elizabeth. The situation was getting desperate, and White left to return to England to gather more supplies, but was prevented from returning to the colony because of a war with Spain threatened. It would be over 3 years later before he was able to sail back to Roanoke. When his ship arrived, they found the colony deserted. No obvious signs of violence, disease, or death, just empty. Only the word Croatoan was carved into a post. Despite searching, the colonists were never located, and the fate of young Virginia Dare is unknown. It would take several more years before another settlement attempt was made, and this time changes would be made. Gathering the people, supplies, and transportation for a colony required a vast sum of money. If the colony failed, it could financially ruin the owner. The new idea was to create what was called a joint stock company. With lots of people buying shares of the company, no one person would be financially ruined if the adventure failed. The English king would always have a large share in the adventure because, as king, the land was considered his. Obviously, the natives would have disagreed, but that's beside the point right now. The king would grant a charter or permission to the corporation to develop his land. The focus of the colony became based on money. If a person bought shares of the company, then they also shared in the profit. More shares, greater the risk, but also greater the reward. This meant that the major purpose of the colony became the growing of cash crops, or crops like tobacco and cotton that would be sold for profit. The settlers were, in a way, sort of like employees of the company who grew the crops and provided security and ran the colony in exchange for a new life in a new world. In 1606, the Virginia Company was granted the charter to develop a new colony. They chose a location near the mouth of the Chesapeake Bay. They named the settlement Jamestown in honor of King James, who was the English king at the time. While it was the first settlement to survive, it didn't always seem that successful. The settlers chose to sail a ways up the James River in order to hide from Spanish patrols who also claimed this area. While the location had a good deep water port so that ships could load up goods, and it was well hidden from the Spanish, it was still located in a swamp and had stagnant, brackish water, mosquitoes, and no good place to clear the land for farming. What with the local Powhatan Indians killing them if they came outside the fort, there was no way to establish a reliable food source. When winter came, the men starved. 80% of the initial settlers died that winter, and the settlement was nearly abandoned before a supply ship with more supplies and settlers arrived. Over the next 3 years, only 60 of the original 214 settlers survived. The winter of 1609 was the most severe, being called the starving time, and forcing colonists to boil and eat the leather of their shoes to survive. There's also evidence that cannibalism took place. It was only the efforts of the third president of the colony, Captain John Smith, that kept the colony from collapsing. Like Roanoke, many of the early colonists were wealthy city folks and their manservants who had absolutely no experience with practical trades and crafts. Smith instituted a harsh system of working for food and demanded that London send him craftsmen and laborers who had experience working the land. The survival of the colony through hard work, no matter if you were a gentleman or a laborer, lays the foundation that in America there's no room for social classes or nobility, and that anyone who works hard can find success. The seed of the American dream had been planted. Incidentally, by the way, you can forget any idea of the romantic Disney version of Pocahontas and Captain Smith. Smith was a wild promoter of his own legends and often told exaggerated stories about his exploits. It also doesn't help that there was a famous story about it from the time period about the daughter of an Ottoman sultan who saves a man about to be killed by her father by placing her head in the way of the executioner's axe, much like the Pocahontas tale. It's very likely the Pocahontas story was entirely made up by Smith. Pocahontas, in reality, married a Jamestown settler named John Rolfe. She was likely about 14 to 18 years old when she married the 30-year-old Rolfe, and after returning to England, died promptly from disease. While she likely did not save Smith, her marriage to Rolfe did create peace between the Powhatan and Jamestown settlers for many years. Jamestown was also the location of another major development in American history. As Jamestown grew, so did its need to solve everyday problems. Since Jamestown was so cut off from England, the Virginia Company decided to allow the colonists to make their own rules about day-to-day decisions. They established the first example of self-government in America when they created the House of Burgesses, which eventually would become the Virginia legislature, which still meets today. Jamestown would survive and thrive, becoming known for its excellent glass-making, tobacco, and timber products. Jamestown had existed for over a decade before another attempt was made to create a new settlement. This one, however, would be entirely by accident, and it would create a new model for colonization. The 1500s were a time of new ideas. The Reformation had split Christianity, and new ideas about religion were spreading. The English had created the Anglican Church, but a group called the Puritans felt that the Anglicans had not gone far enough. Considering the King of England was the head of the Anglican Church, bad-mouthing the church was not much different than criticizing the king. After trying to negotiate with the Puritans and trying to crack down on them, the king decided it was just easier to grant them some land on the other side of the world where he wouldn't have to listen to them anymore. The most extreme of the Puritans, called the Separatists, boarded a ship called the Mayflower and set sail for the New World. They had planned to arrive in Virginia, but a storm blew them off course and they landed in what is today Massachusetts. Now, if you're going on vacation and you pack your bags for warm, pleasant Virginia, and you wind up in cold, rocky, windy Massachusetts, you might find yourself a little unprepared. Suddenly, these separatists, who called themselves Pilgrims, are faced with the similar situation as the first Jamestown settlers. The Pilgrims had expected to arrive in a place that had already started to be tamed and had other colonists living around them for support. Instead, they found themselves in a wilderness with thin, rocky soil, no established crops, no structures, families, including women and children, and arriving in November with no chance of gathering food or supplies. All 132 passengers of the Mayflower had to live on board the ship for that first winter. 45 of the 102 pilgrims died. Since they had landed at a place outside of the boundaries of the charter the king had given them, they were technically in unclaimed and ungoverned land. So they resolved to create a code of laws before they stepped off the boat to give themselves some rules to live by. It was the first example of people living in America and making new laws for themselves outside of the authority of the King of England. They finally made landfall in December of 1620 in Plymouth, Massachusetts. It was only through developing friendly relations with the local Wampanoag Indians and the English-speaking Indian Squanto that the Pilgrims survived and celebrated that fall with a feast of Thanksgiving, which became a cultural tradition in America. Plymouth would continue to suffer its own starving times in the following years, but slowly they were able to establish the second successful colony in America. So what we have is a situation where we have two English colonies, one in the north and one in the south. The one in the north was founded on religious freedom, The one in the South was founded more for commercial and profit making reasons. As news of the Pilgrims' successes spread to other Puritans in England, more started to make the journey. By 1626, another New England colony was established, but not for the same religious reasons as Plymouth for the most part. Salem, Massachusetts, while full of Puritans, was a fishing colony. Like the Virginia colony, Salem was established more to make money and goods for England. However, while Virginia had good weather and deep, fertile soil, Massachusetts's thin, rocky soil was not very good for cash crop farming. Massachusetts, however, had one of the world's richest fishing and whaling grounds in the world. As a result, the lifestyles and cultures of New England and the South are going to develop differently and prioritize different things. This example of geography affecting how people live are going to have consequences throughout American history. By 1629, the success of the Plymouth and Salem in the North leads to the Great Migration of Puritans into New England and the formal creation of the Massachusetts Bay Colony. Nearly 80,000 British Puritan immigrants migrate to America. The colony was founded on strict Puritan religious ideas. Activities like dancing or drinking and even socializing between men and women were seen as sinful and could have disastrous consequences for the community. One of the best examples of this was the Salem witch trials, where 19 people were hanged after being falsely accused of being a witch. On the other side of that, Massachusetts and the Puritans had a very large role in in the creation of an American identity, both as a place of religious freedom, but also in the way that Puritans saw themselves. Puritan leader John Winthrop believed that the Puritans were going to a land that had not been corrupted by human civilization, and on this blank slate they could make what he called a shining city on a hill. What he meant by this was that America was a special place where a new society could be made without the mistakes of the past. In many ways, that idea is the first expression of what we call today American exceptionalism. That America is special in the world and destined for a purpose greater than other nations. While American exceptionalism is a valuable idea in bringing the nation together, it can also be dangerous when taken to the extreme. Puritans were incredibly strict in their rules, and many of the other New England colonies, like Vermont or New Hampshire and Connecticut, were formed because various groups of Puritans would get into disagreements and be exiled from the colony of Massachusetts. So they just moved out and set up their own colony. Within about 50 years, England set up two permanent colonies with multiple settlements. More would soon to become. However, what is more important is the role that these early English colonies played in the creation of an American society. In the beginning, I said that as soon as settlers stepped off the boat, they started becoming Americans. The geography of North America and the distance between the colonies and England made it necessary for them to find independent solutions to problems. As the colonies innovated solutions to those problems, they created the basic ideas that make us Americans. Jamestown establishes the idea that it's your effort, not your title or social status, that determines how successful you are. Jamestown also establishes that normal people can govern themselves and that we don't require a nobility to manage us. The Pilgrims influence America in our religious and cultural ethics, as well as the idea that we can create government from scratch. New England also gave us a sense of purpose and pride in our society, and that we're made for more in the world. How New England and Virginia's economies develop will set how each region sees the world and eventually will actually lead to the Civil War in 100 years. So, 200 years rather. So the way these colonies were established is going to continue to affect every part of our future nation and its history. Thanks for watching. I'll see you all next time on Cleo's Corner.